Hello, my name is Donna Schulte. I'm an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. I'm interviewing Robert Mendenhall. Today is August 14, 2006. We are at the Harrison Public Library in Harrison, Ohio. His wife, Ann Mendenhall, is present, as well as his daughter, Martha Hubbard. Good morning. Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm fine.
I noticed on your biographical data that you enlisted.
Yes.
How old were you?
8. When I enlisted?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was 17 when I enlisted.
Why did you decide to enlist?
Well, back then, if you were in high school, your future was decided for you, unless you had some physical ailment that would prevent you from serving. I mean, you were going into the military. If you enlisted, you had a choice, a certain amount of choice, and I wanted to go into the Air Force. If you waited until you were drafted, it was just into the infantry or whatever they wanted to put you in. So I enlisted, I think it was in about January of 1943, and I got my papers to report just a few days after I turned 18, June the 18th, 1943. I was in the Air Force. I think it was July 10th, I think. So.
Where'd you go for your training?
Well, my orders came. I had to report to Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana. Took the train from Union Terminal to the train station in Indianapolis. They picked us up by bus from there and took us out to Fort Benjamin Harrison. And they gave us physicals and so on there. And by later that afternoon, we were on a train headed down to Miami Beach. And that was for basic training. So we were quartered in the Tides Hotel right on Ocean Drive in Miami Beach. And that was pretty miserable. I mean, you know, they fell us out in the street about 3 or 4 times every night for fire drill. And, you know, you'd fall out in the street at 3 o'clock in the morning. The mosquitoes would look like fur coatings on you. They would land on you in droves and chew on you while you were out there in formation. And then we went to basic training, basically to drill. It was on one of the big golf courses in Miami Beach. And we spent, you know, all day just learning basic drill, you know. And there were some training classes that we had to go through at the time. Then we had to go out and qualify with various firearms. They marched us from Miami Beach about 15 miles north of there, you know, with gun and full pack. My hands were swollen to twice their size just from swinging at my side in the heat of August down there.
Wow. And then when did you get shipped out?
Well, I went from there to Iowa State Teachers College in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And at the time, I was signed up for aviation cadet program, which is pilot, bombardier, or navigator training. And everyone was sent through a little refresher course at various colleges around the country, and I happened to go to Iowa State Teachers College. That was in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And I spent, I don't know, I think it was 7 or 8 weeks there, and you know, we had refresher courses in math and whatnot. And from there, I shipped to, by ship, not by ship, but by train to Santa Ana, California, which was a classification center for the Air Force. And they gave us batteries of all sorts of tests to determine whether you were best suited to be a pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. And included in those were physical examinations. And during that, they found I had a little, very small blind spot, a little scar on the retina of my right eye. And I was disqualified for pilot training, which is what I really wanted to go into. And I had a choice of armor school, radio school, or whatever. There were 4 or 5 choices. And I decided I wanted to go to radio school. So out of there, I shipped to Scottsfield, Illinois, which was just outside of St. Louis, on the other side of the river in Illinois. Belleville, Illinois. And I spent, that must have been from about November of '43 till June of '44. I remember I was there on D-Day, June the 6th. But I went through radio school, and that was kind of around the clock. We had 8 hours a day of Morse code and training on all the various electronic systems on aircraft that the Air Force was using at the time. We had troubleshooting classes on, transmitters, and then we had to build transmitters and, demonstrate that we could send a message to another building on the base. And it was kind of, everything was very high pressure back then. They'd come through blowing the whistle at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning. You had to be up, your bed made so that the $50 would bounce off the blanket, bounce in the air. It had to be that tight. And out in formation, you had 10 minutes to be out of from the time you woke up to be out in formation. And then we were marched off to the mess hall and we ate, and then we went to our classes where we spent the rest of the day. So I spent, excuse me, I guess it was about 6 months there going through training as a radio operator. We had about 87 people in our class, including 10 or a dozen college graduates, and for some strange reason I graduated first in my class from Scottsfield. But I could copy by hand 35 words a minute, which was fast. You almost can never take the pencil off the paper when you're copying 35 words a minute of code. And
so you're translating it as you're...
Oh yeah, you're copying characters as you hear them, and they come at such a rate. When you're copying at that high a speed, you're actually copying like a whole group of characters behind what you're hearing. And so, I mean, with that training, I got to the point where when we were flying bombing missions later on, when I had to copy everything on our strike frequency. And when that code started coming into my headsets, even if I was half asleep, my hand would automatically pick the pencil up and start copying the code. I didn't even have to think about it. I mean, it became that
second
routine.
nature to you.
Anyway, at the end of that training program, which was about June of 1944, we went off to what was called operational training. Well, let's see, no. First I went to aerial gunnery school in Yuma, Arizona. And it was like 130 degrees down there out on the airfield. And we had to unload ammunition from trains coming in, for the aerial gunnery training. We had to sweep the runways off out there. It was like 130 out on the runways, and by then it was like June, July. and extremely hot down there. There wasn't much in Yuma at the time. There were a few Indians sitting on the railroad, in the railroad station.
Had you ever been away from home before?
Away from home?
Away from home before?
Well, before that, I lived for 4 years in England.
Did you?
You know, my mother was a war bride from the First World War. But that wasn't really away from home.
Because she was with you.
I'd lived many places growing up as a kid. Anyway, so we went to Yuma, Arizona, and then from there went back to Scott Field for radio training, which I previously described. And about the end of that training, now I'm sorry, from Yuma, Arizona, I went to operational training and was assigned to the 19th Bomb Group at Great Bend, Kansas, which was one of the early B-29 groups being formed. And we, let's see, I must have gotten there around probably about October of '44, and our training mission, we were flying B-17s because there weren't enough B-29s to go around, but for training they had us fly from Great Bend, Kansas down to Cuba and back, which was about the same distance as the Marianas Islands to Japan and back. And we had various bombing targets, you know, it was just photographic bombing down in the Caribbean. And then toward the end of that training program at Great Bend, they sent us down to Borinquen Field in Puerto Rico, which is out on the western end of Puerto Rico. It was an airfield that the Air Force operated for overwater navigation training. And our bomber crew, they'd put the navigator and myself in the radio compartment, and we had shades over the windows, and we weren't allowed to look out the window or do anything. And they'd take us out across the Caribbean to who knows where, down toward Venezuela. And then on a given signal, we had to find their position within 3 minutes or something like that. So I would call one of the direction finding stations, happened to be down in that area, and get some radio bearings with the loop antenna, and cross those bearings with a sun line that the navigator would shoot up in the astral dome. And what we had to do is find their position and plot a course back to the air base, which was outside of Havana. I'm sorry, no, that was Borinquen Field. Later on, we were over near Havana. But so we had that kind of overwater navigation training, and then we flew from there back to Great Bend, Kansas, and from there we flew to we flew over to Wichita, which is a Boeing plant, WEBAC, Wichita Boeing Airplane Company. And we picked up our airplane that we took overseas from the Wichita Boeing plant. And we flew from there to, what was the name of that? Wendell Field, Utah, where we landed, and I mean, there were all these women swarmed into the plane, and they put in all the retrofit kits that the design changes had been made on the airplane since it left the assembly line. And it was amazing how fast they did that. They were in there installing wiring and, all kinds of equipment.
Yeah.
And then, let's see, what did we do from there? We left there and flew to Sacramento. I can't think of the name of the airfield there. It was the air base outside of Sacramento. And we were there just kind of like overnight for a couple of days. And then we took off from there and flew to the Hawaiian Islands. And that was, the speeds that the airplanes flew in those days, that was like a 11 or 12-hour trip. And during, somehow shuttling around, that was in like November, and I'd come down with a bad sore throat. And got to the Hawaiian Islands, and I wasn't feeling too good, but then we had to take off from there and fly to Guam. And we had to make 2 stops, one at Johnston Island, which was like halfway on out to the Marianas, and then we landed at Eniwetok Atoll, which was just been captured a few months earlier from the Japanese. We landed on, I'm sorry, not Eniwetok, Kwajalein Island. And I was getting pretty sick by then, and they wanted to take my tonsils out under a tree, you know.
With no anesthetic?
Yeah, it was just out in the open there. There was no hospital there, no nothing. And I finally talked them out of it. I talked them into letting me go on because an airplane was not allowed to fly without a radio operator on board. And so I didn't want to hold the whole crew up. And I said, well, you know, I'll struggle through. So we took off from Kwajalein and flew on into Guam. And they had just cleared the Carl airstrip on the island. We were the 3rd airplane to land on Guam after it was secured. And we landed on this Carl strip. And it was absolute. We got out of the airplane and we dumped all our baggage out on the ground, and and we didn't see or hear anything. You know, just some birds squawking in the trees. It was. I don't know why it chokes me up. It was kind of an eerie feeling, you know.
Yeah.
And finally, a truck pulled off some dirt road and came down the runway, and they picked us up, and they had just run bulldozers back into the jungle and knocked trees over, and they dumped some pyramidal tents out on the ground, and then drove off and left us there. So we had to put up our own tents. You know, we were just dumped out there, put up our own tents, and we had nothing, you know, not even a cot to sleep on. And over the next 3 or 4 days, we were able to knock together some things to sit on. There were some bomb crates around. We knocked them apart and built chairs and that sort of thing. And,
so that was your base then?
That was our base, yeah. And I think we'd been there 3 days, and they scheduled us for our first bombing mission over Tokyo.
What was that like?
Yeah, and there were only 6 airplanes there from the bomb group at the time. We were the first to get there in the 314th Bomb Wing. And so we took off with 6 airplanes and went up to Japan. Of course, Iwo Jima hadn't been taken by then. There was nowhere to land if you ran out of fuel or anything. And it was, to go up to Tokyo and back was like it was like a 16-hour round trip. And that was one of the nearer points we went to. It was about 8 hours up and 8 hours back. And when you flew a bombing mission out there, we were briefed by our intelligence officer, squadron intelligence officer, as to where we were going and the maps, and early in the morning. And then the rest of the day, we were given our ammunition load. We had to load ammunition, load bombs, tune the strike frequencies. You know, I had to do that. And so we were working all day from early in the morning, and then we had our final briefing at midnight. And we'd take off about 1 in the morning, get over Japan about 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. And at that point, we had had no sleep, for almost 2 days. And then it was another 8 or 9 hours before we got back to. So every time you flew a bombing mission, you were up for like 48 or more hours with no sleep. And we'd get back, and we were flying like 3 missions a week from that point on. So, you were like, you got like no sleep for 6 full days of that week. I was never so tired in my life. Boy, I got to the point where I could hardly climb into the airplane. We were so worn out. And we were given Benzedrine tablets to keep us awake. We had to take Benzedrine tablets, which I think now they call, what do they call that?
I'm not sure.
Some kind. It was a popular drug here a while back,
Yeah.
but that's what they gave us to stay awake. And
So when you were able to sleep, was it hard to fall asleep then?
with the Benzedrine,
Yeah.
no. And as a radio operator, we were required when we got back to turn in our logbooks. We had to record every message on the strike frequency, and you were in big trouble if you didn't have every message recorded. And that's why it was real valuable for your hand to be able to copy messages while you were half asleep. But
So how many?
we took K rations along. It was like a Cracker Jack box. You'd open up and it had various things to eat in it. So that's what we ate.
How many missions were you on?
43 altogether, but 8 didn't count. You had to complete 35. On 8 of them, there were various things happened where we had to turn back. We lost an engine on the way up, and we were approaching Okinawa. It was later in the war, and we were supposed to rendezvous over a little island called Smith Island, which was just the tip of a mountain sticking out of the water. And we were lagging behind because we only had 3 engines working. And as when we got about 20 miles from Smith Island, we could see the rest of the planes in our squadron circling, and we could see phosphorus bombs going off in the middle of the which meant they were under attack by Japanese fighters. And so we turned back and we dropped our bomb load on Tanegashima, which is an island just south of Okinawa, on some naval installations there. But we didn't get credit for that mission because we were bombing, on that one, we were bombing kamikaze airfields in Kyushu to try to, dropping delayed action bombs set to go off up to, I think it was 18 or 20 hours after you dropped them all over the runways, so the kamikazes couldn't use the airfields because they would stage up further north and they'd fly down, refuel on Kyushu, and then head on down to Okinawa at that time. But that was one of the 8 missions that didn't count, and there were various reasons for having to turn back. It was a long trip, and if you had any kind of engine problem or the fuel transfer pump failed to work or whatever, you couldn't make it all the way up the back, so we'd have to turn back. So we actually flew on 43 missions to get 35 completed.
Was your plane ever hit?
Was it ever hit?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, many times. Yeah, we were during the landings on Iwo Jima. We were forced to land there a number of times because we couldn't make it back. We had engines shot out. We had hydraulic lines blocked, shot out with shrapnel and various damage. We had to land there. One time we had to land on Iwo Jima. We landed between the Marine lines on one side of the airstrip, and the Japanese were on the other side. We landed on the airstrip, and the Japanese were still holding the northern end of the island. And we slept under the airplane that night, and And they were tripping, the Marines had trip flares, you know, these wires spread all over the ground on little stakes. And if they tried to infiltrate, come through, they would kick one of those wires and it would send up a flare. And then all kinds of machine gun fire would break loose as they tried to stop them from coming across. And that was going on all night. And the naval, there were a couple of destroyers shelling Mount Suribachi, which is still held by the Japanese at that time. So we slept under the airplane that night, and that was going on all night long. And we had to have a replacement engine flown in from Saipan. Had to change out an engine, you know, right there on Iwo Jima before we could take off again and fly home. So that was some of the reasons for the, you know, not completing the, for taking 43 trips to Japan to get 35 missions credited. And I can't remember all the various things that interrupted some of his flights, but it was a long, long trip. I mean, it was so long and boring. You know, by the time we got to Japan, we used to look forward to the Japanese fighter attacks because it broke the monotony.
And what was your job as radio operator when you were flying?
Over Japan? My job was to sit in the navigator's astral dome and call out fighter attacks. You know, I could see from up there in all directions, and I would call out fighters coming in from different directions so our gunners could pick them up more easily. But,
so you had the bird's eye view. You had the bird's eye view.
Yeah, kind of, you know. But the fighters would, on the day missions, the fighters would queue up out on the right side of our formation, you know, just out of range, and one by one they'd pull forward and peel across the front and come fly through the formation. And they'd drop their flaps as they came in and kick the rudder back and forth, spraying the formation as they came through, and then just before they got to us, they'd flip over on their backs and dive away. So on the day missions, we generally had quite a few fighter attacks.
Were you always in the same place in the formation?
Generally, yeah, and on the day missions. The night missions, we went in at low altitude. We were dropping incendiary bombs, and we went in at like 4,000 to 8,000 feet altitude because we had to pick up the bombing area on radar. A radar operator would, usually we were told that our bombs had to drop like between two rivers in a certain area. You know, coming down through Tokyo, there were two rivers, and we'd try to hit different areas, you know, that were pre-established, and at night it was hard to see them unless it was moonlight. And so we'd go in there and drop our bombs in the designated area. Like, I remember one night it was close to the Emperor's Palace. We went in there, and but that was at night. It was just kind of area bombing. You were trying to start fires, and most of our bombs were incendiary bombs. About half our missions were at night, and about half were during the daytime. At night we had some night fighter attacks. Japanese night fighters would fly along, and they'd flip their landing lights on and off and try to get you to shoot at them. And if our gunners opened fire on them, they could see where the fire was coming from, and they'd make a pass. And I remember a few occasions seeing tracers passing over our airplane from the night fighters. But mostly, the worst thing at night was coming in at night. They'd pick you up in the searchlights, you know, way out. Their searchlights would almost be parallel to the ground, and they'd pass you, you know, one searchlight battery would pass you along And then other lights would come on and they would pass you along. And we'd fly up that whole Kawasaki, Yokohama, Tokyo corridor, we'd usually be in the lights for 40 or 50 minutes, being passed from one searchlight battery to the next, and under anti-aircraft fire as long as you were in the lights. And sometimes when the anti-aircraft fire would stop, you would know that there was a night fighter sitting out there. If you were coned in the lights, the night fighter could come in and the gunners couldn't see too well because, you know, we would sometimes have like 80 or 100 searchlights coned on us going in at night. And we were at fairly low altitude, you know, like 6,000 to 8,000 feet. And, but the flak was, you know, they had like, I think it was something like 600 heavy guns in the Tokyo area and 4,000, you know, medium anti-aircraft guns. And one of my jobs was to check that all the bombs had cleared the bomb bay doors when we finally dropped our bombs. And the bomb bay doors would open and I'd look down there and I could just see clouds of tracers coming up. You know, it looked like bubbles coming from the bottom of the ocean or something.
Mm-hmm. Were you ever wounded?
I was hit one time, but unfortunately I was wearing my flak vest. It's a piece of shrapnel that hit me in the middle of the back. And, you know, we could hear this shrapnel going through the airplane. We'd come back with, you know, maybe 50 or 100 holes in the airplane, and it would just go whang, you know. And you could hear this stuff flying through the sheet metal in the airplane, and we'd come back. That's part of a 90 millimeter shell. That exploded right outside where I was, between the number 3 engine and the fuselage. And it knocked out the number 3 engine, and that piece of shrapnel hit me on the back. It hit me coming at an upward angle. I was wearing a flak vest, and it hit about a ½ inch below the bottom of the flak vest. If it had been an inch lower, it would have gone through my spine, and I probably wouldn't be alive today. But that's what the pieces of the exploding shells looked like. But all it did was give me a bruise, you know.
Yeah.
It was like getting hit with a rubber mallet in the middle of the back. And
what do you think was your most memorable experience? Is there one that
most memorable
stands out, or?
Well, it was like a blur. We were so tired all the time, you didn't really. And the flights were so long, just trying to stay awake and then be awake enough when we got over the target area and do what you had to do and get back again. Most memorable, I guess probably the most memorable was the several times we had to land on Iwo Jima because we were damaged and had to either refuel or get an engine repaired or whatever. Iwo Jima was an amazing place at the time. It was just littered with dead that hadn't been buried. At the time the first 2 or 3 times we were there, they were bulldozing, you know, reworking the airstrips on the island, and I mean there were arms and legs sticking up out of the dirt, you know, as they just plowed the Japanese dead into the airstrips. There were so many of them. There were like 30,000 killed on the island and several thousand Marines. And I remember little things. I remember walking down. Things were pretty messy at the time. I remember walking down to the beach where they had a mess tent set up to get something to eat, and the moon was shining, and I stepped across this ditch, and there was the moon was shining in the eyes of this dead Jap Marine lying in the ditch, and there was only half of him there. He'd been blown in half by, I mean, there were pieces of shrapnel that long laying all over the ground from the 16-inch naval guns that were bombarding the island before they landed there. But they were just dead everywhere. I mean, and the first couple of times we were there, they hadn't buried very many of them. You know, they were just all over the place.
Tell me about your medal. Distinguished Flying Cross?
Oh, those were fairly routine. That was basically for completing 35 missions over Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And then the air medal was, it was sort of like for every so many missions you got another oak leaf cluster, and this is the Asia Pacific ribbon with 3 battle stars. We had battle stars for the Ryukyu's campaign, which is Okinawa basically, and for the the Bonin Islands, you know, the Iwo Jima, Chichijima area. And the other one was air offensive against Japan. So those were the 3 battle stars.
When were you awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross? While you were still on active duty?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to remember if we... Seems to me they mailed those to us later on. We got our...
I was picturing a ceremony.
There weren't many ceremonies
Yeah.
there. We were too worn out.
Yeah.
We're up all night and working all day, every day. So, no, I vaguely remember we got the orders, you know, the paperwork, but I think those were mailed later on. Anyway, let's see, where was I?
You were telling me about Iwo Jima.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was about halfway between the Marianas Islands and Japan, and the reason that they invaded the Iwo Jima was to give us a refueling stop if we needed it, and I don't know how many B-29s landed on Iwo Jima. It must have been hundreds between February and the end of the war, because if you had any kind of damage at all, you know, on that 18-hour round trip, you couldn't make it back to the islands. And if you did make it back, I mean, there'd be like out of our island, maybe 200 airplanes coming back pretty much at the same time, and we had one airstrip. And all these airplanes would come in a cloud, all trying to line up with the runway and land together. And those that couldn't get lined up, you know, they were pushing one another out of the way and going up and down. And if you were lucky, you got in and were able to land. But I remember one time we came back, we had, I don't know, I think we had about 5 minutes of fuel left, and we were trying to line up with the runway. We just had to keep going and push everybody out of the way, and or we wouldn't have made it back onto the ground. Those are some pictures.
Yeah.
Well, let's see.
Did you remain friends with anyone in?
So some guys on
Yeah.
our crew. Yeah, I pretty much. Well, that was an airplane. That was an interesting thing there. I think. Every time we flew a mission, we had a standby crew in case somebody couldn't take off, especially for the day missions. And on June the 26th, 1945, we had an engine problem of some kind. I've forgotten what it was now, but we couldn't take off on that mission. And the standby crew that flew in our position in the formation was rammed by a Japanese fighter over the mainland, took the whole left wing off, and that crew was in. There were 3 crews in each Quonset hut, and they were in our Quonset hut, and they flew in our position, and I guess I guess you could say that would have been us if we happened to have been able to take off that day.
Do you know if they survived?
Did anyone survive?
Mm-hmm.
Not that we ever heard of, no.
Mm-hmm.
There were 3 parachutes, I think, seen out of the plane, but Japanese fighters were seen shooting at them, and they may have been killed on the ground. The Japanese executed a lot of aircrew members back then that landed in Japan.
Who took these pictures?
Well, those pictures were taken by gunners in the rear blister gunner section of the airplane. That's back in that section. A camera was always there, and if anything was seen of interest, one of the gunners was supposed to take a picture, and these were all taken by
From your plane?
By gunners, yeah, out of the gunner's blister.
So, when your service was up, what happened toward the end there before you came home?
Well, we flew our 35th mission on, let's see, I think it was the 1st of August, 1945. And that was our last mission, and we were told that we were going to get a 30-day furlough. We got to fly home, and then we were coming out for the invasion of Japan. And on the 6th of August, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and so we didn't have to come back. You know, that's really what it amounted to. But we flew back, gosh, I think it must have been on about the 3rd or 4th of August, 45, just before the first atomic bomb was dropped. And, you know, people theorize about, you know, dropping the decision to drop that bomb, but there were, according to our briefings, there were, I don't know, something like 10,000 Japanese troops waiting for the invasion in Kyushu, and every one of them was going to fight to the death. And we would have probably had at least 1 million more casualties in World War II if they'd had to go in and invade Japan. I mean, you know, on Iwo Jima, there were no prisoners taken. They fought 32,000 Japanese died on Iwo Jima. And I don't think, there might have been 1 or 2 wounded captured or something like that, but they killed 6,000 Marines on the beach, just coming ashore. And Okinawa was pretty much the same situation. And I think Truman's decision to drop the atomic bombs to end the war was, and it probably saved, although a lot of people were killed, it probably saved millions of Japanese lives, because, you know, if they'd been in there fighting to the last, which they were expected to. So I think it was a good decision. It was about the only thing, they were so fanatical, it was the only thing that was going to end the war. And anyway, we flew our last mission on the on the 1st or second, I think it was the 2nd of August, and the first atomic bomb was dropped on the 6th. And at that point, we were on our way back. We were supposed to fly back to the States, get a 30-day furlough, and come back out. And you know, I was in Honolulu at the time that the Japanese announced they would surrender, and that was the day I almost got killed.
Really? How did that happen?
Well, the day they announced the surrender, we had hitchhiked into town to get a decent meal, and we were just living in tents out there near Fort Cam. And we'd gone into a restaurant, and we were sitting there eating in Honolulu, and suddenly the little guy that ran the restaurant ran out. He lowered these wooden shades over his windows. He said the war was over, the Japanese had surrendered, and he was afraid there were going to be riots in the streets and whatever, and get his windows broken. So we went out, and we had taken a cab into town, but there were no cabs available, and we got a ride in a pickup truck. I think it was a Navy truck, back out to the base. We were hitchhiking back out to the base. And we stopped at a stoplight, and I was sitting in the back of the truck, and I looked up and I saw this steak-bodied Japanese Navy truck, and it was full of sailors all hanging out there and yelling, and they plowed right into the back of the truck. And I don't remember exactly, but I went up in the air and I landed on the median strip in the middle of the highway, coming out from the Fort Cam. And we all wound up in the hospital on VJ Day. flew 43 missions to Japan and almost got killed by a bunch of drunken sailors celebrating VJ
Figures,
Day.
huh?
Yeah.
So then, were you able to come home? How soon were you able to come home?
Well, at the time we left Guam, we were told we were going home for what was it, 30 or 45 days furlough, and then we were coming back out for the invasion of Japan, which of course never happened because the atomic bombs were dropped while we were in Honolulu on our way back, and the Japanese surrendered on the I think it was the 5th of August or something like that. And so we didn't have to go back out, but we flew our airplane back to trying to remember now. Yeah, we flew it back to Honolulu, and then we took a ship from Honolulu back to San Francisco. And it was while we were in Honolulu on our way back, because we'd completed our 35 missions. We were supposed to go home for 45 days and then come back for the invasion of Japan, which never happened, of course. So, we caught a ship from Honolulu to San Francisco, and it was an old beat-up rusting hulk. It had been in the Okinawa landings, troop transport, and it was on its way back for repairs, and they put us on that ship back to San Francisco. We had like a cup of rice a day to eat, because when we got on board the ship, the captain came on the loudspeaker and he said, do you want to wait till we get provisions, food on board this ship, or do you want to go now? And everyone said, oh, let's go now. So it turned out that on the 11 days it took to sail from Honolulu to San Francisco, we got a scoop of rice once a day, and a cup of cocoa, and water, just cocoa, water-based cocoa. That was the 3 meals.
For 11 days? Did you say?
Well, the ship had been damaged in the Okinawa landings. It was an old Liberty ship that it was a troop transport, and it had a number of Japanese flags on the funnel that they shot down during the Okinawa landings, and it had one engine out. It had 2 old reciprocating steam engines, and one of them was out of commission. So we chugged along at 6 knots from Honolulu back to San Francisco. And that was kind of an inglorious way to come home. And I remember we sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge, and we got, let's see, yeah, we got over to a dock, and they unloaded us off that ship and right up onto another ship. And we never did quite understand that, but we were transported to a different place to unload, out to an island. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was an island out in San Francisco Bay. But, yeah, they unloaded us there, and then we had to wait to be transported by train back to various places. And mine was, of course, back to Cincinnati. And it was, you know, we got like a scoop of rice once a day to eat.
What was it like when you came home?
Well, it was strange when we boarded the ship. Oh, well, they took us out to the ship. It was an old Liberty ship. Mm-hmm. 2 engines. One engine was disabled. It had been in the Okinawa landings, and they hadn't never gotten the second engine running. Took us out to that Liberty ship in the middle of the night, and then we were required to scrub the ship down. We spent all night scrubbing that whole ship down, and then the next morning they sent us all up on deck so we didn't dirty up the interior of the ship. And this was in, let's see, yeah, that was in San Francisco, San Francisco Bay. And so we worked all night cleaning up the ship. And then they wouldn't allow us to stay. They sent it, everybody had to go up on deck. And we had nothing to eat or, you know, anything. And it must have been around mid-morning. I think there were something like 6,000 men on that ship that came back from Honolulu on. And after we had scrubbed the ship down, we had to go up on deck, and we couldn't go down below again. They didn't want us to dirty up the ship again. So we were up on deck as the sun rose, and then across San Francisco Bay, it must have been probably 9 or 10 in the morning, we heard the strains of music floating across San Francisco Bay, and it was San Francisco, Here I Come. There was a military band on the deck of this ship that was coming out, and I guess it was some sort of a welcoming party. And they had all these, I guess, I don't know whether they were movie starlets or what they were, but they were all on deck, and they were all waving. And of course, we'd been up all night with no sleep, and traveling from the Western Pacific.
And only rice and cocoa.
Yeah, rice and cocoa, yeah, that was about it. And we, I think there were about 6,000 standing on the deck there, and all we could do was stare at them. They came by, and every time the band struck up California, Here I Come, the movie starlets would wave their handkerchiefs, and everyone just stood there. We'd been up all night. They made us scrub the ship down through the night, and it was unimpressive. Anyway, they finally gave up and sailed away. And then they took us ashore where we were to be deloused, and you know, we'd been on our way for several days at that point with no showers or anything. Well, the only shower they had on the ship was a salt water shower. You could shower in seawater, which was not, I mean, your skin was kind of crawling after that. So we were not in any great mood for a reception. When we sailed from Honolulu to San Francisco on an old Liberty ship that had been in the Okinawa landings. It had been damaged. It only had one engine working, and Then when we got into San Francisco Bay, they made us go up on the upper deck, and we stood there all night, you know, so we were in great mood for a welcoming committee when this tugboat came along with a Marine band playing on board, you know, San Francisco, here I come, or whatever it was. And these little movie starlets were all standing on deck, and every time the band struck up, they would wave their handkerchiefs, and everyone on the ship just stood there. We'd been up all night, had no sleep. Anyway, that's how we arrived in San Francisco.
Your wife was telling me that when you came back to Cincinnati, you went to college on the GI Bill?
Oh, yeah.
You have an aeronautical engineering degree?
Yeah.
From University of Cincinnati?
Yeah.
So you went right to school then, when you came back?
Well, yeah, more or less. I think I started in, let's see, I think I started late. The GI Bill class started, and I think it was, I was traveling back from overseas in September, and I think I started school in about November, like a month later on the GI Bill. Yeah. And went through engineering school at the University of Cincinnati.
Did you remain friends with anyone in your squadron?
Oh yeah, yeah. I still, those that are still alive, I still.
Do you have reunions or?
I'm trying to remember now. We never really had a true reunion, but I think I did get together individually with some of the people, you know, after the war on a couple of occasions. Our airplane commander was, let's see, yeah, he was called back up in the Korean War. He was killed in Korea, shot down over Korea. And I'm trying to remember where all the various people are. I guess most of the guys.
Mr. Gilman? Mr. Gilman, did you want to tell him?
Mr. Gilman?
Oh, Ed, yeah, Gilman. He's still alive. I think.
Served in
I think
the House, was it, or in the Senate? Did he serve in the House or in the Senate?
Ed
From New
Gilman.
York. From New York.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember now. No, he didn't serve in the Senate, but he had something to do with government up there.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think how many of those people are still alive. Our airplane commander was is not still alive. I'm trying to remember how he died now. Anyway, I think there are probably 4 or 5 of us still alive, you know, from the aircrew.
How long have you owned your company? Your
owned
company?
my company? Since, it's, about 1980, I guess it is. Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, we basically design propulsion systems for ships, naval vessels, and other industrial applications of aircraft gas turbines. We have gas turbines driving gas compressors on natural gas pipelines. We have gas turbines driving ships in the Navy. And we design gas turbine applications for many industrial.
What is the name of your company?
the name of the company is MTSI,
MTSI.
M for Mendenhall, Mendenhall Technical Services Incorporated.
After college, who did you work for? Where did you go to work?
Boeing Airplane Company in
Thank
Seattle.
you.
I spent about 2 years out there, and then I came back, went to work for General Electric for about, oh boy, what was that, about several years, 7 or 8 years. And then I started my own business, designing and building gas turbine powered electric power systems and natural gas pipeline compressor stations, things like that. And eventually, let's see, what did I do? Eventually sold that company, and now I'm back somewhat doing the same thing again. We're designing and building gas turbine driven industrial and naval installations.
So you think your military experience inspired you
to do
to
that?
a career?
Well, I went through UC on the GI Bill when I got out of the Army in 1945, and my first job out of school was Boeing Airplane Company in Seattle. I spent 2 years there, and then I came back and went to work for General Electric locally here, and I spent 10 or 12 years at GE. And then I left GE and started a company. We took aircraft gas turbines to drive ships and natural gas pipeline compressors and generators and so on. And did that for, how many years was that? Through about 1980, I guess it was. And then I sold that company and wound up starting another similar company, which is the company I run now.
And I promised to get you back to it, didn't I? This
what?
afternoon. I promised to get you back to your company.
Oh, back
This
to the
afternoon.
company. Yeah, I guess I should
Did you
be
say
getting back.
1:30?
Yeah. Anyway, that's what we do now. We have a company here in what section of town are we in?
Fairfield?
Fairfield, yeah. And we design and build gas turbine engine driven
Yeah.
ship propulsion systems.
And you're meeting with the South Koreans today, huh?
Hmm?
You're meeting with South Koreans today, you said?
Well, oh yeah, we have units all over the world that we've designed and built out here, all driven by aircraft gas turbines. These are generators, gas compressors for natural gas pipelines, marine propulsion for ships, that sort of thing. So,
Thank you
Okay.
for coming.
All right, you're very welcome.